My name is Boutenko, and I'm passionate about wild edibles. After doing countless lectures and workshops on edible plants all over the world, I have noticed approximately a dozen edible plants that I've been able to find in North America, South America, Europe, and Australia. In this video, I'm going to show you how to harvest and prepare the most common wild edible plants. Before we jump in, let's cover some basic ground rules. Number 1. Don't eat something if you don't know what it is. I cannot stress this enough. Wild crafting can be safe and easy if you follow this one basic rule. So be sure you can positively identify all the distinguishing characteristics of a wild edible plant before you consume it. Number 2, try all new plants in small amounts. All of our bodies are different and thus may have different reactions to perfectly edible plants. To avoid allergic reactions and other mishaps when eating new plants, limit consumption to just a few leaves. Number 3, don't mix too many wild edible plants together in a meal before you know how your body reacts to them. For the purposes of this video, I will be playing with lots of plants in order to demonstrate how I typically eat. However, if you're new to foraging, I suggest that you keep your mixing to a minimum. Once you have some experience under your belt, then go ahead and mix all the weeds you are familiar with. In addition to these 3 rules, it's also a good idea to consider the environment in which you plan to harvest wild edibles. Every forager should aim to avoid chemicals, pesticides, and other contaminated areas. The following places are definite no-nos for foraging: railroads, golf courses, major roadways, and public areas with heavy traffic. If in doubt, ask around. Do your research to figure out if an area is clean. A responsible wildcrafter is one who recognizes that he or she can negatively impact an area by overharvesting its sensitive plant life. As a conscious forager, you should approach an ecosystem the way that you would a garden. When collecting wild food, pick only what you need for the next few meals. Don't stock up for the week or the month. Many people think that wild edibles only grow in pristine forest settings, but it is often quite the opposite. Just as garden vegetables like warm temperatures, sunlight, and water, so do wild edibles. Thus, if you go looking for tasty plant life at high elevations, in dark forests, or in regions that are arid, you'll likely come home empty-handed. Great foraging spots are generally near water and below 4,000 feet in elevation. For this reason, I'm shooting this movie at my friend's organic farm. Here we will find the most common plants of the world, and it is likely that these same plants are growing in your own backyard right now. So without further ado, let's dive in and pick some wild edible plants. The first wild edible I'd like to introduce to you is grass. As you can see, there's a huge field of it behind me. Grass is a great beginner wild edible because it's easy to recognize and it grows everywhere. Worldwide, there's about 300 varieties of grass and all of them are edible, which sort of makes it like the perfect survival food. If you don't remember anything else, remember this: all grasses are edible. It might not be the tastiest meal you ever had, but it will sustain you and nourish you. All grasses are going to be rich in chlorophyll, vitamins, and minerals, and they're essentially the same thing as wheatgrass. Now, because we're not livestock, we're not cattle or goats, it might be difficult for us to digest grass. So the way that you'd eat it is you'd pull on the top of some grass and look for the tender, light green parts. These tender light green parts are a great lesson in meristems. Meristems, or meristematic parts, are the growing parts of a plant. These parts are going to be tender, they're going to be saturated with more sugars and proteins, and thus they're going to be tastier and more nutritious. So whenever you feel a part of a plant that's flexible, maybe lighter green in color, that is a meristematic part. And that's the part you want to munch down on. Give it a try. These yellow flowers in front of me belong to a plant known as salsify, or another common name is goat's beard. This is currently my favorite wild edible. They are the only dandelion relative that's not bitter. So the flowers and every other tender part of this plant is very extremely delicious and can be eaten in salads, sandwiches, or as a trail-side nibble. It's all edible, but the most tasty parts are the tender parts, the meristematic parts, if you will, the growing parts that have a lot of sugars in them, that have flex and give. Now, all dandelions are loaded with vitamins and minerals. They're especially good for our inner organs, our pancreas, our kidneys, our liver. The easiest way to identify a salsify is by the flower. These flowers come in brilliant yellow and purple. And the other distinguishing characteristic is that it has these green sepals, these big green leaves behind the flower. Interestingly enough, this flower is only open during the morning hours. So if we were to come back here around noon, all of these flowers would be shut. So if you want to catch the flower while it's open, you got to be an early bird. As I go to harvest these, I also want to point out my philosophy on roots. There's a certain responsibility I feel as a forager to harvest plants in a manner that will save some for other animals and also allow the plant itself to keep growing. So I very rarely harvest the roots of plants. Instead, I pull out my trusty scissors and I just snip it at the top. I leave the roots intact, and then I throw my harvest in a bucket. And perhaps this is a good time to also point out that wild edibles are very perishable, and so to preserve them while harvesting, it's a good idea to have a bucket with cold water as well as a little mister so that you can mist them down, and this acts as refrigeration in the field. Some other key features that identify salsify are these very long grass-like leaves. In late summer, these flowers will also turn into a huge dandelion-like puffball. And so depending on which stage you get it in, you can either identify it by the flowers, the tall, slender, grass-like stems, or the big puffballs. So I'm just going to go through here and harvest some of the flowers, as well as the other tender bits. Right here, here's another good thing to notice. This is a flower that hasn't opened yet, and this part is very tasty. In fact, I could just go like that. So you just go through here and pick off all the tender parts and throw those straight into salads, sandwiches, your mouth. I would also like to point out that when you break the stem of a salsify, white sap oozes out. This sap is perfectly edible and is very good for digestion and your inner organs. So don't be afraid to eat this stuff. I'm excited that we got to see salsify. These flowers will look beautiful in our salad later on. Wild mustard is best identified by our sense of smell, because wild mustards always smell like mustard. So if you crush up any part of this plant, whether it be the flowers, the leaves, or the stem, and give it a smell, it should have a very spicy mustard-like aroma. Wild mustard is insanely nutritious. In fact, my friend and fellow forager John Kalis believes that wild mustard is the #1 most nutritious plant out there. It's got really nice broad leaves that are spicy and will be delicious in a stir fry. So I'm gonna go ahead and mow this guy down. Directly to my right, you see yellow flowers that are gumdrop shaped. These flowers are part of pineapple weed. And pineapple weed is essentially wild chamomile. Just like chamomile, pineapple weed has soothing properties, and this plant is best utilized when dried and steeped in tea. The easiest way to identify pineapple weed is by the smell. And this is a great lesson in using all of our senses when foraging. I advocate that all new foragers get in the practice of using all 5 of their senses: sight, hearing, smell, touch, and taste, because all of those senses will give you more information about a plant. Now, certain plants will be easiest to identify with sight, but other plants like this will require other senses. Pineapple weed actually has kind of a fruity smell, and it smells very much like a blend of chamomile and fruit. So the easiest way to ID this plant is to crush up one of the flowers and give it a smell. And it smells sort of like pineapple. Additional features that will help you ID it are the yellow pineapple-like flowers and the tiny little leaves that are in leaflets under the flowers. They look very much like dill leaves. Because I'm making a salad later on, this weed is not going to be necessarily appropriate for the salad, so I'm going to let it be in the ground. But now you know that this is pineapple weed, and all parts are edible, and you could utilize it however you like. When I look directly to the left of the pineapple weed, right here in front of me, there's another edible plant. This plant right here is known as shepherd's purse, and it's a type of wild mustard. All wild mustards are edible. Mustards are all part of the brassica family, which includes plants like arugula, cabbage, kale. And the easiest way to identify a mustard, again, is by smell. When you crush up one of the leaves and give it a sniff, it should smell kind of spicy, sort of like mustard. I also want to point out that it has heart-shaped seed pods, and this is a great identifying feature of shepherd's purse. This entire plant is edible. Today I'm after the tender leaves as well as the seed pods, and if I'm lucky, I'll even get a few of the flowers. I'm going to throw all of those in the salad to add a little bit of spice and texture. Now let's see what else we can find on this farm. In front of me, I have Lambsquarters, which is one of the most common plants found all over the world. It's a relative of quinoa. In fact, if you were to see quinoa growing right near Lambsquarters, it would be hard to tell the two of them apart. This plant is one of the richest plants in protein. It's a very mild green. It tastes kind of like spinach. And it's a great green in salads, smoothies. It's very easy to eat. It's very pleasant, so it's a great beginner wild edible. And it grows rampant on organic farms and empty lots. It's a common weed in gardens, and it's very hard to eradicate, so you can literally harvest this plant until the cows come home and without fear of worrying that you're going to decimate the Lambsquarters population. The reason it's called Lambsquarters is because farmers used to let their lambs graze on it. So don't be afraid, there's no meat products within this plant, it's just a name. This plant is quite easy to identify. It's got a very hardy stem. The stem also has purplish, pinkish lines all over it. The leaves themselves are covered with a fine, whitish, sometimes purplish dust, and the dust kind of rubs off and feels very waxy to the touch. And this is essentially calcium, so you don't need to wash that off. You can eat it straight with that. Interesting little fact, the same dust that you see on the bottoms of the leaves, on the leaves themselves, acts as a water repellent. So if you were to dunk the plant in water, it would come out bone dry because of this dust. The entire plant is edible, although the smaller the leaves, the more nutritious and the more delicious they are. Today I'm going to harvest a bunch of this stuff so that I can prepare some tasty dishes with it later on. This right here is green amaranth, another tasty common weed. It looks pretty similar to Lambsquarters, except for a key difference. the seed pod at the top is very easy to identify. So the key identifying characteristic with green amaranth is the seed pod at the top. It's spiky to the touch. It has up to 15,000 seeds. You don't really want to eat that part, you want to eat the leaves. The leaves are the part that we're after. They're very tender, great in salads. And so with this plant in particular, I'm very interested in the leaves and not so interested with anything else. Now with green amaranth, there is a plant that looks similar to this that you don't really want to eat. It's a nightshade, like a common nightshade. So you really want to look for these seed pods to make sure that it's green amaranth and not the nightshade. And you want to make sure the plant has smooth stems. So smooth stems, seed pod, green amaranth, green light. In front of me, I have common mallow, which is a close relative of okra, and it has a very okra-like taste. Another common name for this plant is cheeses or buttonweed, because it grows little fruits in the shape of buttons, which make it very easy to ID this plant. It's another great wild edible weed for beginners because it has a very subtle taste. It doesn't have a very strong chlorophyll taste at all. When the leaves get really big, it's a nice plant to use as wraps. So we could put little pieces of avocado in this plant and wrap it up, maybe pour some lemon juice on it. It's a very nice little snack, very simple, very fast. The common identifying characteristics of common mallow is a long stem, but the stem is not smooth. It's got a little texture to it, it's rough. It also has leaves that are overall disc shaped, but they have lobes. So there's some lobes. The leaves can get pretty big, be mindful of that. It also has white to purple flowers. The best way to ID common mallow is by its little fruits, also known as buttons. They're little disc-like fruits that have big green sepals. They almost look like little hops. These are very delicious. These parts right here have the most okra flavor of the entire plant. The entire mallow plant can be eaten. You can boil it just like you would okra. You can use it in gumbos, or you could eat it raw in salads or smoothies. We got purslane growing right here, and purslane is the #1 richest wild edible in omega-3 fatty acids, which makes it a great plant to prevent any sort of heart problems, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, so it's very good for the heart and the brain. Purslane is a sprawling weed that grows low to the ground through commonly planted lettuces and things, so you can find it almost anywhere growing in between your crops. It's got a nice lemony taste to it, and it's really delicious in smoothies. I find that it helps the smoothies stick together better. If you've ever made a green smoothie and then left it on the counter, it tends to separate. Well, if you add a green in there like purslane, it'll bind the smoothie and act as a binding agent so that you can later go back to that smoothie and it looks much more appealing and appetizing. Here are some identifying characteristics. Purslane looks like a succulent. It's got a smooth stem. It's got teardrop-shaped leaves. Like I said before, it sprawls along the ground. So if we really look close, like over here, boom. It has these big branches that crawl along the ground, and that's perhaps the best identifying characteristic. As purslane matures, it tends to develop a red hue on the stem. That's a great identifying characteristic. The entire plant is edible. The stem, the flowers, the greens, the tender greens, the meristematic parts, the parts that are growing, are going to be the most nutritious and the tastiest. Throw the entire plant in smoothies, but if you're going to use it in salads, I recommend taking just the leaves and peeling it off the plant. Quite often when you sit down to harvest one plant, you can find other plants in close proximity. For example, here we have prickly lettuce, dandelion, and more mustard greens. The prickly lettuce and the dandelions are the origin of all lettuces. Thousands of years ago, before romaine lettuce or red leaf lettuce, there was prickly lettuce and dandelions. And my guess is that from those origins, people hybridized lettuce because they wanted a sweeter, bigger leaf. So essentially they would see a dandelion growing and it was kind of bitter to the taste, and they would look for that variety that was slightly sweeter and had big leaves. They'd wait for it to go to seed and plant those seeds to get even bigger, sweeter leaves. And they did this over and over again until now we have something that looks almost nothing like a dandelion. The nice thing about these wild lettuces is that they're actually more nutritious than store-bought lettuces. They generally have longer root systems. Those roots can go down below depleted topsoil and draw out more vital nutrients for our bodies to assimilate. Dandelions are perhaps one of the most underappreciated weeds out there. Most people would never think to eat a dandelion and in fact curse them for growing in their lawns. But they're loaded with all kinds of good stuff for us, and they actually make for a really tasty smoothie green. They're a little bit bitter to the taste, but if you blend them in a smoothie with fresh fruit, no problem. Most people could probably identify a dandelion, but let me give you some key identifying characteristics. For starters, the leaf has jagged-like lobes. In fact, in French, it's called dent de lion, which means tooth of a lion. And you can kind of see that the lobes that are sharp resemble a tooth of a lion. Dandelions also have smooth stems and one yellow flower per stem. A fun little fact is that you can eat the flowers. They're very tasty, they're great in salads, and they actually concentrate vitamin D from the sun and thus are a great little additive for an emotional boost in your meal. A key tell to tell a true dandelion apart from its lookalikes is the main vein. If you flip the leaf over and run your finger along the main vein, dandelions will always have a smooth stem. Dandelion lookalikes will have a fuzzy or prickly stem. Directly to the left of the dandelion, we have what's known as prickly lettuce. At first glance, the leaves kind of look like dandelion leaves. But if you flip the leaf over, you'll notice that the main vein has prickly thorns on it. Check this out. The dandelion on the left, prickly lettuce on the right. I'd also like to point out that both plants have milky white sap. Because I'm making a salad today, I probably won't be harvesting too much prickly lettuce, but in my regular practice, I often do harvest this plant and blend it in a smoothie. To my right, I also have some wild mustard leaves. Now earlier we picked some yellow mustard flowers. I'm going to pick some leaves now in order to fluff up the salad. Just a quick reminder that all mustard greens smell like mustard, so if ever in doubt, crunch a leaf up, give it a smell, and if it smells like mustard, you're good to go. Here we have a wild rose. All roses are edible. In fact, there's a saying, a rose is a rose is a rose, which means that a wild rose is very similar to a domesticated rose. Unlike domesticated roses, wild roses have 5 petals. But if you were to take a domesticated rose and let it go wild, it would eventually return to its natural DNA, which is 5 petals. Another great identifying characteristic of the rose is the hardy stem with thorns. All roses are edible. In fact, a fun little tidbit is that apples and blackberries are actually part of the rose family. Roses are all rich in iron, so they're very good for people lacking iron. The flowers can be used in salads, on desserts. The leaves are oval and serrated, and when they're young, they're very tender and can also be used in salads. some plants are sun-loving, and this rose right here is a sun-loving plant. At the base of the rose, you see miner's lettuce, and miner's lettuce is a shade-loving plant. So not only are we witnessing two plants that love different environments, we're also witnessing a symbiotic relationship. The sun-loving plant is casting shadow for the shade-loving plant. Come in a little closer and I'll show you miner's lettuce. So miner's lettuce is one of the tastiest wild edibles I know of. It's very mild to the taste. It doesn't have a strong chlorophyll taste. It's essentially the romaine lettuce of the weed world. It's very rich in vitamin C. In fact, 1 cup of this stuff has about 90 milligrams of vitamin C. It's quite easy to identify. It has big disc-like leaves, and it has a smooth stem that goes directly through the middle of the leaf. Another great identifying characteristic is that miner's lettuce all stems from the exact same place. I'm gonna pick this miner's lettuce, add it to the salad later on, and it's gonna go, it's gonna be finger licking good. And so I'm cutting the stalks so as not to eradicate the roots. And here we have a nice batch of freshly harvested miner's lettuce that's gonna taste amazing in the salad. Now that the weeds are picked, let's make a monster salad. Before we start chopping, it's a good idea to give our wild edibles a rinse. And we're gonna do this just like we would with any vegetables. We're gonna dunk them in water, like so. Give them a nice shake. And this is also a great opportunity to pick through your wild edibles. Make sure you don't have any foreign plants in there. And then we're just gonna start chopping them. We got our mustard greens. Into the bowl they go. We have some of our purslane. The nice thing about fresh food is that when you have scraps, you just throw them back into nature. So you got our juicy purslane. I find that it's easiest to just harvest it straight with some scissors into the salad. I'm going for the juiciest leaves, but the stems will give us some nice crunch. A nice organic compost. Here we also have our green amaranth. Dunk. Now with the green amaranth, we don't necessarily want the spiky seed head, so I'm just gonna pop off the leaves into the salad, and I'm gonna compost the seed heads. Sometimes it's actually faster to go with scissors, so here I go again. Find a technique that works for you. This is gonna taste really nice. I've been waiting for this all day. Let's see, what else do we got in here? Ah, miner's lettuce. This is choice salad greens. In they go, nice little rinse. Grab our scissors. The stems are juicy, full of vitamin C, so we definitely want those in there. Pull out some of these roots, little sticks. Those are just extra fiber. Let's see. Aha, Lambsquarters. With some plants, there's actually a trick to getting them off the stems, and Lambsquarters is one of those. You can just hold the stem firmly, slide your fingers along it, and the leaves will pop right off. I'm not a terribly picky eater. I don't mind a little bit of fibrous parts, so I tend to throw salads together pretty quickly. If you want to spend more time and have less stems in your salad, you're very welcome to do so. Some of this Lambsquarters is nice and purple, so it's going to add some color to our salad. If I were to be blending this stuff in smoothies, I have a very high-powered blender at home, so I just chop it up either with scissors or a knife, throw it straight into the blender. No muss, no fuss. We got our common mallow over here. Same principle. And with common mallow, it really is easier to use your scissors. I'm just going to come in here and chop the leaves straight in the salad. I personally love the little buttons in the salad as well, so I'm going to add them for texture. And if you are lucky enough to have some flowers, go ahead and chop those in. This is going to add some really nice crunch. Aha. We got some dandelion greens in here and some more mustard leaves. Get some of those going. And we have these beautiful mustard flowers right here. Those absolutely must go in the salad. So I'm actually going to cut them. I've been misting them all day, so I don't want to rinse them, otherwise they're all going to end up in the water. So I'm going to cut them straight into the bowl. And we also have some salsify and some shepherd's purse. Let's give that a rinse. Remember, with the salsify, all of the tender parts are edible, and so all of the tender parts of the stem can be utilized in the salad, especially the tops. The tops, even if they're on unopened flower, taste very good. Here's another top. We also have our shepherd's purse. Remember, those are the heart-shaped ones. And just like with the Lambsquarters, I'm going to hold them by the stalk and just slide them right in. Quickest way to harvest the seed pods. All right, starting to come together nicely. I also brought with me some condiments. Today, for my field dressing, I'm going to use some olive oil, a little balsamic vinegar, a little sea salt, Bragg's liquid aminos, and some nutritional yeast. So, I'm just going to dress it with olive oil. I like to eyeball everything. Brags. And it looks like I forgot my balsamic vinegar, so no balsamic vinegar. A little sea salt. And we have some organic nutritional yeast. And now we're going to give it a good, nice, long mix. For the finale, I'm going to put my flowers in this salad. So I have my tasty salsify flowers right there. Those are going to go in on top. I also have some wild rose. Got my wild rose petals straight into the salad. And I happened upon these daisies, and daisies are part of the sunflower family, which is one of the largest family of plants. And all sunflowers are edible, so these oxeye daisies are definitely going in the salad. Look at that. You couldn't buy a salad this good if you tried. I hope that with this video, I have dispelled some of the common fears about harvesting wild edibles and inspired you to explore the outdoors in a safe and conscious manner. Now you have the tools to take advantage of these tasty hidden treasures, and you can go out and reap all the benefits that wild edibles have to offer. I recently learned that a banana travels an average of 2,500 miles to get to the consumer. Some of the disadvantages of such practices include loss of freshness, food being harvested before it's ripe, and a massive waste of the Earth's finite resources. Wild edibles, on the other hand, are an entirely local food. You can harvest them straight from the ground when they are fresh, and the only energy expended is your own. We call this energy expenditure exercise, and it's recommended by health experts to be done on a daily basis. In addition, harvesting free food can save you lots of money on your grocery bill. And from a nutritional standpoint, wild food is superior to store-bought food anyway. If nothing else, foraging exposes you to nature and thus gets you breathing fresh air, collecting vitamin D on your skin from the sun. And in an era when we spend the majority of our time in front of screens, being outside with weeds is invaluable. Thank you for watching this video. For more information on wild edibles and foraging, check out my book. It's available at sergeybutenko.com and in bookstores near you.